Greetings and welcome to yet another episode of Free to Learn, a weekly production brought to you by the Zimbabwe National Students Union in partnership with the Danish Students Federation. And this week I'm joined by Karen Manzera, a social and economic justice advocate as well as a member of the ZNASU or Zimbabwe National Students Union, and we'll be discussing the students and the national question in an unending fight for social justice. So Karen, let's have a go at it. Social justice.
So when we are looking at social justice, basically we're looking at the equality in terms of opportunities and in terms of resources, along the lines of demographies and gender,
Okay, yeah. So it's more about distribution. Exactly. And then there's also the issue of the national question. Okay,
so we're not looking at the national question. We are looking at, for example, our economic environment, how the economic policies actually affect people. From those who are in the elite to the lowest ranking, and even the students themselves. And we are also looking at how the general government policies and institutions, how they are actually dealing with the general people, and how their policies are actually affecting people, even from their individual lives.
Okay, so now you've spoken about the government and the policies. That means politics and the economy being at the center of resource distribution. And now we are talking about the student, right? So we need to understand, how then does this, like the question of social justice, then rope in the student to be involved?
So before we are students, we are citizens, and whatever policies that the government put in place, as the students, we are affected by them. Whatever economic policies that Professor Mtulingwe put in place, as the students, we are going to be affected by them. So we are looking at how the national policies affect a general student, how policies that are affecting our education system, our education sector at the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, how they affect a general student who is at the various institutions around the country. Okay,
so that also speaks to issues to do with tax and issues to do with tuition and issues to do with student debt. Now let's get down to student debt as a cause of social justice. What's your outlook, or what's your perspective on status quo, and how then do you align that into achieving social justice on campus?
So in the past few months, and years, we've seen massive fees hikes in the various tertiary institutions around the country, and a general student cannot afford to pay for tuition, and yet loans have not been readily available for them, and the government has actually been doing nothing to make sure that student funding or student loans are available.
What's government's stance towards this? I remember there's been an article where is it Minister Murwira who promised free education next year. That was in 2017, and now we're in 2021.
So free education has been promised since time immemorial, and yet, what's happening is actually the opposite of what the government promises. Because again, the Constitution says it is the government's mandate to make sure that every child actually affords to go to school, every child gains an education, but that is what is not on the ground. So I feel that the government is not doing enough in terms of making education accessible to every child, because from primary school, at least children usually from primary school to high school in the custody of their parents. But when you get to tertiary institution, I'm sure you know about this, then most of these things are now in your hands to take care of. And yet the economy does not allow us to be able to pay tuition fees. So I feel that the government is not doing enough, because again, you look at what the Minister of Finance, the amount that he gives towards education, and yet the recent Auditor General's report was saying that the Auditor General said she wasn't sure what some of the money was being used for in the education system. So I feel that probably maybe because of corruption or whatever is going on in the education sector, but it's directly affecting us as students, and I feel that the government needs to step up in terms of their promises that they've made. They need to make sure that education is affordable to every citizen, to every child.
Okay, so you mentioned about budget allocations, and you mentioned about appropriation of funds in the education sector. If I remember well, at the beginning of the year or towards the end of last year, the budget, like the Minister of Finance had increased the amount of money that they were allocating to education from 12 to 15%. But then this also is happening against a 25% allocation to the military and then another 20% to the presidency. Like, you know, over prioritization of the presidency, the military, and less of education.
Because firstly, maybe we need to understand that, you know, allocation and what then happens on the ground are two different things.
Yes.
The minister can allocate so many millions to the education sector, but if a general student in Uzumba, Maramba, Pfungwe is not benefiting from that allocation, then we're doing nothing. So I feel like as much as the minister is allocating money to the education sector, again, like I said, the Auditor General's report, you know, exposed what is happening in the education system. So as long as such things are still happening, then we're going nowhere in terms of the education system in our country. So let's have the minister allocating, but again, let's have every student then being able to benefit from that allocation that is being made.
Okay, so apart from having subsidies for education, grants, etc., how else does a student benefit, especially those that are in primary and secondary, and looking at those in the rural areas? How do they benefit from this money?
I would say that, you know, amid the COVID-19, you know, induced lockdowns and children having to stay at home and not learning, and the government actually pushing for e-learning, yet only the children in from the elite families are the ones who are able to access e-learning because of, again, the exorbitant prices that are being charged for data. I would say that the government needs to make sure that there is infrastructure that allows for e-learning since we are amidst the COVID-19, and every child needs to be able to continue to access education, because already it's creating it's a gap, and it's creating even a gap in the future, because some of these children are still being able to access education, but those in the rural areas and those from families that don't get so much are not able to access education. So I feel that allocation is okay, but implementation is key, and it needs to make sure that every child, you know, regardless of their class, their economic class, are able to access education, especially during these times of the COVID-19 induced lockdown.
Okay, coming to issues to do with COVID-19, not just on campus or in class or at school, let's also look at the outside environment, because you said before being students, we are also citizens. The health sector, right? How is the budget allocations to the health sector and the education sector helping the student get access to good quality health and achieving sustainable development goal number 3 of good health and well-being?
So I'm sure that very few, you know, students, very few young people are able to have even medical aid. We only get these when you're on campus, and I'm sure everyone else is not able to even afford to have, you know, a medical aid. So our healthcare system is in such a way that you get what you pay for, and as students we are low income earners, or rather no income earners, and you know, so we are not able to even access quality healthcare. And again, like I said, the public healthcare system is in shambles.
But then, basing on that, on government priority, what do you have to say?
I'll say that it is the issue of misplaced priorities within the government, because we don't even have to go far, Liam. You know, at my tertiary institution, at the main campus at the Midland State University, you see, you go to the university clinic, to the campus clinic, you get paracetamol for whatever you're feeling. If you're having backache, you get paracetamol.
No,
if
wait,
you're having...
wait, can I cut you short? You say you get paracetamol traditionally for just feeling sick.
It's more like that's the only medication that you get when you get there. So when you're having backache, you get paracetamol. When you're having headache, you get paracetamol. For everything that you're feeling, you get paracetamol.
Okay.
So you see, but we pay for medical aid, and they actually charge us a high price for that. But they are not even able to provide quality healthcare to us as students. So it's just a matter of, I don't know if it's their arrogance or what, but I still feel like they need to step up, especially the government, in terms of providing quality public healthcare for every citizen.
Okay, so misplaced priorities actually come from misplaced principles, and misplaced principles come from misplaced individuals. When I talk of misplaced principles, I'm talking about what then do we see as right or wrong. And we've seen that we have a government that thinks siphoning out funds and using them to, fund their political aggrandizements and their perpetual election agendas is right at the cost of people's lives, because health has a direct link to life. And then misplaced individuals, now it comes to the kind of personnel we've been deploying into handling public office, particularly the vice president, who also is the minister of health, from the barrack
to the hospital.
To the hospital. That itself speaks volumes to the nature of social justice and how we can deliver quality health care to students and the general citizens.
And the quality, the state of general hospitals do speaks volumes to the issue of misplaced personnel, because that's why you see the fact that walk right now into a government-owned and government-controlled hospital, and you won't be able to access quality healthcare, because it's not only the issue of being able to access healthcare, but it's about the quality of the healthcare. So now, again, we see that the elite are able to always go out of the country to seek medical help, but now it's about all the general citizens who still have to walk into Parenyatwa, who still have to walk into the Midlands Provincial Hospital to access healthcare. So I feel that the government, again, particularly the Minister of Health and Childcare, need to step up.
So what then is the role of the student in making sure that this is done? What do students do? What does ZINASU do to address this problem in their capacity as a students' union?
So now that's where the issue of fighting for socio-economic justice comes in. And myself as a social and economic justice activist and ambassador, as students, we then come to call the government to order, or come to call the government to hear our pleas. Government just doesn't take these issues seriously, but they don't understand that as citizens, the policies that they put in place do affect us directly. So as the Students' Union, we actually have been trying to lobby the government. We've been trying to lobby the government. We've been writing position papers. We've been, trying to involve the government, even in dialogue. For example, the issue of fees hikes. But at times they take that as an attack on the government. But it is not an attack on the government. We are simply trying to put out our pleas to our government, so that maybe as the students, our lives can be made better.
How do you foresee the future? Do you guys think you can call it quits, or the struggle continues?
The struggle continues, Liam. The struggle is our birthright. And again, I love that the Constitution, allows us to demonstrate. Section 58 says it is our right to freely demonstrate. So we will never call it quits. We are still going to push for social and economic equality, because I believe that the gap of inequality in Zimbabwe is too big, and it is mainly caused by national policies. Those are things that can be made right. Those are things that the government can simply make a choice to choose. So it's about the political will of the government in terms of changing the narrative, or to changing the policies, just to make sure that there is inclusive growth, inclusive development, and everyone is included. Okay, so
Karen, in a last point of conversation, social justice at the most minute level, eliminating social, economic, harmful practices affecting everyone. looking at child marriages, we've had the Memory Much Higher case. What's your take on that?
I'll say that government needs to, intervene. Various sectors of the government, the police, the government itself, various ministries, the Ministry of Health and Childcare, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Education. Because again, maybe the Ministry of Education always need to come up with statistics of young girls and women who are dropping out of school because of child marriages, but we never see that actually happening, which means that even the Ministry of Education is not doing enough in trying to look into this issue. So I feel like the government needs to step up. The government, we as the union, and as girl child activists, we are actually calling for the government to at least start caring. This is about principles, social principles. So the government to show that, because before they are government officials, they are fathers, they are mothers. So, parliamentarians, women parliamentarians, they are not even calling to order some of these things that are going on. And we actually question, their principles. So we need the government to, like I said, at least start caring and, take an active approach to the issue of child marriages and to all the harmful practices that are actually violating women and student rights in general.
So there is need for these women to start, like I said, recollecting with their misplaced principles and priorities in solving issues.
Yes, and that's true. And one thing that I know is that if something is coming from the top, if revolution is coming from the top, it is powerful. But if they don't do anything, then revolution has to start from the bottom. And that is why we as the students then come up to call them to actually put effort, in dealing with these issues.
Wow, so it's an egalitarian, grassroots-oriented revolution. Wow, so Karen, thank you for coming today, and I'm glad you really managed to give an outlook of what the unending fight for social justice is in the student's perspective.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. So I'm Liam Kanenga. I'm your host. This was Free to Learn, brought to you by the Zimbabwe National Students Union in partnership with the Danish Students Federation. Please do catch up with us next week.